A woman bought an expensive dress, brought it home to the husband, showed him the bill, and he said to her, "When you tried it on, why didn't you say, 'Get behind me, Satan'?" She said, "I did," and he said, "It looks so good from the back."
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Welcome back, Catholic pilgrims. It is week 22, and this week is the last reading from the little section titled External Influences. And next week we will be moving into the section titled Virtues, which should be very interesting. This week is a little different. You're going to notice that the reading is different, and I wasn't quite sure how to approach this week, but I think I came up with kind of a creative way to go about it. I'm not going to give you 3 points this week because Bishop Sheen is going to lay out 5 subjects, 5 titles for us, and so I think those are the ones to focus on. The topic for this week is called 5 Fish for the Devil's Hook, and I think you're going to find it very interesting. So let's get started. Number 22, 5 Fish for the Devil's Hooks. As one makes a study of those who have been caught on the hooks of the devil's fishing line, or who hide behind their freedoms in order to destroy the very source of that freedom, and who are thus particularly gullible for the devil's bait, can be reduced to 5 classes. Number 1, haters. Bigots use their heads, though wrongly. Haters use their spleens, though overmuch. Hate may come from being ridiculed, for having lost a job, or for being unsuccessful. In order to exonerate themselves, they fasten the blame on others and develop an unholy hate against a class, a race, a government, a party, a business organization, a group, or a church. But since their individual hate has such impotence, they search about for some conspiracy that will socialize their resentment. Finding a group which collectivizes and intensifies their hatred, they swallow the hook, not so much because of what they admire in the group, but because of what they hate outside the group, which socializes their hatred. Number 2, socializers. Not everyone in our modern world develops social interests because he loves his neighbor and God. There are some who enter social work in order to escape the incessant, accusing repartee of their consciences. Failing in individual justice, they compensate for it by espousing social justice. They escape the need of personal reformation by going hog wild about social reformation. They meddle with everyone else's morals in order to be too busy to correct their own. If their behavior were better, they would be truly religious people and do much good for society. They look for a cause which will leave them alone with their individual vices. They swallow the devil's line also because its anti-religious character satisfies their desire to expunge from the world all ideas of morality and virtue, the infractions against which have made them so uneasy in the dark. Number 3, bored intelligentsia. Their education should have given them a goal or a purpose of life. Having failed to do so, their knowledge is nothing but a crazy quilt of unrelated facts and undigested bits of information. The want of unity both in their moral life and their knowledge makes them desirous of unity, but not a unity from within, which demands moral stamina, but a unity from without. Certain sects provide that for them. They no longer have to think. The sect does the thinking for them. They now have a mission, a sense of belonging to a totality, and one in which they are no longer bored by their freedom, having surrendered it to the collective anthill of the sect. Intelligentsia do not become members of a sect for an intellectual reason. That is why when discussing the sect with them, they never seem to understand it. Instead of a reason for becoming a member, they have only an intention, namely the desire to escape boredom. Their motives are alien to the rational. Number 4, neurotics. Every neurotic is antisocial. Normal persons are linked to society. The abnormal, uprooted through their delusions, are daily confronted with the absurd. They are naturals for any antisocial movement opposed to culture, morality, and peace. In fact, the more absurd a system is, the more it appeals to them. The connection between the neurotic antisocial traits of a person and the neurotic antisocial wars and revolutions which we see around us in the world today is extremely close. As flies go to honey, so neurotics gravitate to antisocial behavior. They are easy targets for the devil's bait. Number 5, satellites. These are just plain dupes or dopes. They may not be obedient in action, but they are obedient in thought. They see only what they want to see. They love the limelight which certain causes give them, but are incapable of analyzing a historical situation. They are professional signers. They will put their name to anything that identifies liberty with license. The devil uses them because they are naive and credulous. They belong to every politically correct organization, but like the false fronts waiters wear, they are nothing but stuffed shirts with a tail which the devil twists to his own good pleasure. So like I said, as I was going through this, I was like, well, do I try to find a person in history that fits each one of these categories? And I was like, no, that just doesn't feel right. I feel like as we're reading through this, all of us probably were going, oh, yes, I see this trait in this person. And so I just felt like our minds would naturally do that. If you really wanted to do some self-reflection, you can see if you've ever belonged to one of these groups. As I was reading through it, I told my husband, I don't want to sound prideful, but I've never been in one of these groups per se at a very intensified level. Maybe in small ways, I would guess, but I don't feel like these are the areas where I struggle. And maybe I do, and I'm just not aware of it, but just thinking through it, it doesn't seem that way. But really, it could be a good self-reflection tool going through these different groups that he's talking about that tend to take the devil's bait very easily. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to offer a saint who counteracts this group. Now, there are many, many saints I could pick. I basically just went with the ones that quickly popped into my head and I could, tell their story pretty well. And so that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk through each 5 of these groups and I'm going to give you a saint that I believe is the opposite of a person that belongs in this group. So let's start with the first one. And that would be the group haters. And what's interesting is this first line, and I think it needs some clarification because it took me just a moment to get what he was trying to say. He says, bigots use their heads, though wrongly. Haters use their spleens, though overmuch. Now, spleens is an interesting word to use, and so I had to kind of think about what is he trying to say here? Spleens are that part of our body, that organ that help us with immunity, and I think that's what he's getting at here. Everyone else is to blame, and so they try to create this immunity around themselves, too much immunity around themselves so that they never accept any constructive criticism. Nobody can admonish them in any way, and everyone else is to blame for how their life is, and that's what he talks about here. He says they fasten the blame on others and develop an unholy hate. So the saint that I thought of was St. Thomas More. I mean, he came right into my head because my daughter and I just finished reading A Man for All Seasons for her English class. And I was thinking about how King Henry VIII, he really would fit into this category of haters because he hated any kind of criticism. He wanted everybody to go along with him. If anybody stood in his way, he was going to destroy them. And what's so interesting about St. Thomas More is he became King Henry VIII's chancellor right at the time when King Henry VIII decided he didn't want to be married to his wife Catherine of Aragon because she wasn't providing him with a male heir. Now, the interesting thing is that when King Henry's brother had died and he had been the husband of Catherine, Henry had gone to the Pope and got a dispensation in order to marry Catherine. Now he didn't want to be married to her anymore. And so he wanted to divorce her so that he could marry another woman and hopefully she would give him an heir, Anne Boleyn. And the Pope was not going along with this because he had given the dispensation. So King Henry VIII, as many of you all know, he ended up breaking away from the Catholic Church. He at one time had been a great defender of the Catholic Church. I think the Pope gave him the title of Defender of the Faith. Anyway, he broke away and started the Anglican Church, and he set himself up as the head of the church. And it's still that way today. And he wanted everybody to go along with this. And St. Thomas More was his chancellor. And King Henry VIII really respected St. Thomas. And St. Thomas was quiet on the whole matter. He wanted to remain silent about it all. He wasn't going along with anything. And he thought that he was safe if he just didn't say anything. He didn't agree with what Henry was doing by trying to divorce his wife and marry Anne Boleyn, and then obviously setting himself up as the head of the church in England and putting in his own bishops and everything. He was not in agreement with that. However, he was also a loyal subject to King Henry VIII, and he just wanted to remain silent. However, Henry VIII did not want any part of that. He wanted people to profess out loud that what the king was doing was perfectly fine, and they stood behind him. And nearly everyone fell in line with this. Cardinals fell in line with it. Noblemen, everybody did, because you didn't cross Henry VIII. You just didn't, or you were going to wind up on the chopping block. And that's ultimately what happens with St. Thomas More. And I think he's a contrast to the haters because he always remained calm. He still tried to do a good job as chancellor. He wasn't trying to make waves. He wasn't trying to, put the spotlight on himself, though it did in a way put the spotlight on him. And he tried to remain a good and loyal subject to King Henry VIII. And he was trying to show him through his silence that he didn't think what he was doing was right, kind of a way as admonishing him by not just directly calling him out, because he was trying to be a good friend to him. He knew this was going to be a great mortal sin on his soul, and he didn't want that for him. And so he was actually being a really good friend. King Henry VIII wanted no part of it. So I think we see there that St. Thomas More really shows a contrast to the group of haters. The next group we have is the socializers. And just to remind you of who they are, it says, not everyone in the modern world develops social interest because he loves his neighbor and God. There are some who enter social work in order to escape the incessant accusing repartee of their consciences. Failing in individual justice, they compensate for it by espousing social justice. And we see this all the time now. People are social justice warriors, but it comes off as false, at least to me. Maybe I'm the only one. It comes off as false, and it doesn't seem like there is a true love of neighbor as the motive behind it. And so I think the saint that really contrasts with the socializers is St. Mother Teresa. She went into the most deplorable, devastated, poverty-stricken parts of India and rescued people who had literally been thrown out as garbage and took them back to, her place and took care of them and treated them with dignity. And many of them were going to die anyway, but she let them die with dignity and not alone, and to remind them that they are loved and that they are precious. And she did this just because of her love of God and love of other human beings. And it was truly beautiful. Now, it did get her a lot of attention because when you do that sort of thing, it makes people notice, because most people won't do that. I think it's impressive that she was just this little tiny nun. I don't think she wanted the limelight. I think just by her actions it drew limelight. But she was doing it for real love of other people and for God. And we know that she had a darkness in her soul. She didn't always feel God's presence, and yet she continued to do it anyway. And she was always going to confession, checking herself. And so I think she is a direct contrast and a great example of someone who does try to bring about social justice for all the right reasons. The next one is bored intelligentsia. It's so interesting. I had, oh my gosh, a bored intelligentsia in my life when I was at Kansas State. I took a class on natural disasters, and I thought it was going to be super exciting. I think it was my freshman year. And I was really looking forward to it because I thought we were going to talk about earthquakes and hurricanes and volcanoes and everything like that. And the first day I walk into class, and it was one of those gigantic classrooms filled with hundreds of people. And the room was dark, and the professor was way up at the front. And he talked in monotone the entire time. I always tease my kids about how he talked, because he was always like, and the volcano was bubbling and gurgling, and then it exploded. I mean, it was a true fight to stay awake in that class, because I think I had it after lunch, and it was dark in there, and he was a bored intelligentsia. But aside from that, I think the saint that is a direct contrast to this is St. Thomas Aquinas, obviously. So many of our professors and intelligentsia, they are bored because they're not really doing anything with all of this knowledge that they have. And they've just puffed themselves up, and they think they're so important. And so few of them have worked out in the real world. Not all of them, but some of them. And not all professors are bad. I did have some really good ones. But too many of them have just taken the easy street and relaxed into their tenure and just are bored. They're just bored. And I think St. Thomas Aquinas shows us what to do with the great knowledge that we have. If we're blessed with a high intelligence and an ability to understand complex things, he really shows us. And that's what he did. He wrote the Summa. And if you've ever tried to read the Summa, it can make your brain hurt because it's a level of intelligence that is impressive. And you can't just pick it up and just, thumb through it. But he used that intelligence to give evidence for God, the proofs for God. And he wrote about so many different things, trying to draw people to God and to understand his attributes and how we should live our lives as Christians. And it's been widely beneficial to thousands of people. And it still, to this day, continues to impress people, bring people to God. And, it's just a fantastic, intelligent piece of work. So he's a good example of a direct contrast to the bored intelligentsia. The next one is the neurotics. And the neurotics, as a reminder, is antisocial. They have all these delusions. They want to be opposed to culture. They just really want to destroy. They just want to destroy everything that's good, true, and beautiful, tear it down. and be a part of revolutions. When I was reading through this, I was thinking of so many in the French Revolution that just went nuts, just destroying and creating havoc wherever they went. So I think the saint that contrasts this is Saint Philip Neri. And my oldest daughter, when she was getting ready for her confirmation, almost chose him as her confirmation saint. I know it's a little odd because he's a guy and she's a girl, but he exuded so much joy. And he started the oratory, where it was this kind of informal gathering of people to just come and be social together, and to sing songs and to tell jokes and to listen to him preach in a very informal way. And he was just a joyful guy. And that's what he loved doing. He loved gathering people together to enjoy each other's company and to smile and sing and laugh and to enjoy all the wonderful and good things of life. And so obviously he's a direct contrast to people who just want to destroy those kinds of things, who take no joy, in other people's company. As human beings, we're social creatures. And so it is weird when you have people who just want to utterly isolate themselves for very negative purposes. And St. Philip Neri, he wanted no part of that. In fact, he worked really hard to bring people together. And, if you ever get a chance, read about him. He's a fascinating saint and just a really, really neat guy all around. So definitely check him out if you ever get the chance. My daughter actually ended up picking Our Lady of Joy, which is, kind of the female counterpart to St. Philip Neri. And it's perfect fit for her. So the last one is satellites. And he says these are just plain dupes or dopes. They may not be obedient in action, but they are obedient in thought. And he talks about how they love the limelight, which certain causes give them. So the saint I picked for this was Saint Faustina, mostly because I read about her last year, so she's still fresh on my mind. Her diary was what I read last year for the podcast. And what's interesting about St. Faustina is she was not an educated woman. I think she only made it to about third grade. So I guess you could call her kind of a dupe or a dope in a way, because she wasn't a super educated lady. She was not St. Thomas Aquinas by any stretch of the imagination. However, she was obedient in action and in thought. And she wanted no part of the limelight, but she just wanted to do what Christ was asking her to do. And I've said this before. She was an obscure, uneducated nun in Poland in a convent. And yet she wrote this diary because Christ asked her to write these things down. And she brought about the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and she got the painting of the Divine Mercy, commissioned, all because of what Christ asked her to do. And she was so obedient through it all. And there were so many times where she was unsure if she was on the right path, and she would talk to her confessor and she would talk to her Mother Superior. And she was always wanting to make sure that it wasn't voices in her head and that she was just making all this up. And she would talk to Christ and, ask him, please show me that this is the true and the correct path. Help me to be obedient to you. And she was. So that's why I picked her, because she was always asking questions. She was always checking herself. She didn't want to fool herself. She didn't want to dupe herself into thinking that she'd been commissioned with this great mission to bring about the Divine Mercy Chaplet. She wanted to make sure that she was right. And so it wasn't about her. And that was what was so impressive about what she did, is because as you read through the diary, you see that all along the way, she's checking herself, she's checking in with Christ, she's checking in with her confessor, she's writing it down. You can see when she has doubts and she's unsure about what she's doing, and you can see when she struggles with this mission that Christ has put her on. and yet she still does it. And she believes in it, and she wants to bring it to the world, and so she does. And so that's why I picked her as the contrast to the satellites. So anyway, we talked about 5 great saints today. Gosh, I just scratched the surface of them. There's so much more that could be said. If you get a chance, ever read A Man for All Seasons, a great book about St. Thomas More. If you haven't done my podcast with Sister Faustina's Diary, you might check into that. It is a daily, year-long podcast, but I feel like it's a really great way to get through her diary. We just read a little bit every day. And definitely also, if you can handle the Summa, maybe get a book that is not the full Summa, but one that can kind of guide you through it, because a lot of atheists, they want the intellectual arguments, and St. Thomas Aquinas provides those. And so I think it is important for us as Catholics to have those higher level intelligent answers for them when they come asking about it. And definitely, like I said, if you ever get a chance to read about St. Philip Neri, read up on his life. He's such an interesting saint and a little different than other ones. He just was a happy-go-lucky type of guy. And I think we all know Mother Teresa pretty well. But if you ever get to read her quotes and just the different things that she said, I highly recommend a book about her or a book about her quotes. They are just a treasure trove of excellent thoughts and things that she said. So that is all for this week. I will see you back here for week 23. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.